Hey, beautiful souls. Welcome back to another episode on my Miracles of Mind YouTube channel. Today, I have an interview for you that's a little bit different than the kind of thing that I have done before. I will be introducing you to a woman named Angela Herrington. She has been a pastor, went to seminary school for the last 10 years, but she is also a coach that helps people through their deconstruction of faith. When she went to seminary school, she really ran into so many people who struggled with their faith. And they found that it was often a lot more harmful than helpful and more hurtful than healing. And because of that, she recognized a big need to support people through the process of deconstruction. And I found so much resonance with this because as a Course in Miracles students and teachers, we are learning that we must deconstruct our own thought system in order to step into the right-mindedness and then one-mindedness that we share with God, with Jesus, and all of our brothers and sisters. And so the deconstruction part of things is absolutely essential when we are really learning how to have faith that is only helpful and that is only healing. And a lot of the time when we are taught about faith from the world, it is mixed in with ideas and beliefs and conclusions made by the world. But what Angela does that is so empowering is she helps you to like flick off the world and what other people might think or say or judge, and really help you to connect back in with your own mind, your own heart, your own being, and learn how to trust your intuition, to really learn how to trust yourself again and nourish yourself and nurture yourself. She talks about this idea of mothering yourself, which I am such a big fan of. I mean, that is something that you don't have to be a mom to do. It's just the feminine energy, the feminine presence where you can just embrace yourself and know you are loved and cared for. And it starts with you. It starts with you. And so I just found this conversation with her was really nourishing and really helpful in a different way of seeing things. And I tried my best to tie it in with the Course in Miracles principles that we're already learning through our Course in Miracles and on this channel. And so I hope that it's helpful for you. While you are watching this, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the comments. And I know Angela will respond and I will do my best to respond as well. All of the information about Angela's work, and she even hosts, Deconstruction Faith Summits, and so many other amazing things. You can check her out on her website, which is in the caption below. And be sure to like and subscribe so that there can be more content that is sent out to you and people like you that are of greatest service and helpfulness to you on your awakening and healing journey. So my friends, with that being said, enjoy this episode and I'll see you soon. Bye. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining with us today. I am Brittany Shawley, and I have a wonderful guest that we get to chat with today. This is Angela Herrington. Welcome.
Thank you.
I was just saying to her too that I came across her on Instagram, and I love everything that you post and share around this topic. And the topic is predominantly creating sacred spaces to have courageous conversations, which I'm a big fan about the deconstruction of faith, of church, which we'll get into, but also recovering from religious trauma and learning to trust yourself again. And I love that you say that. I feel like everything that you do will speak to our audience immensely because we do know that trust is the foundational element of everything else that's to spring upon it. And if we have these difficult relationships with religion, with Jesus, with the Bible, with church, it can get really destabilizing and really confusing and scary. And so I'm just so happy to have you here today. And, I would love to know actually a little bit more about you and maybe what brought you into this work. Maybe you can like deepen our understanding of this a little bit more and who you are. And then we can dive into some questions to really help people today.
Sure. Great place to start. People always kind of laugh when they're like, how did you get into deconstruction? And I say, I went to seminary because it's such a weird thing, right? Like you went to seminary. I didn't grow up in church. I kind of grew up around it. I was the VBS kid or Easter or Christmas at grandma's church, that kind of thing. I actually kind of came into a more formalized religion a little later in life after I already had kids. And it felt like somebody gave me the rule book for life. Like finally, like, oh, I just have to do these things and then I'll be accepted. I'll be good enough. I'll be all those things. And it was great in the short term because I'm a huge people pleaser, type A, just tell me what to do and I'll do it. But what happened is after spending many, many years in that space, I became an insider, which was cool. And then I got to hear some inside conversations, and I was like, oh, wait a minute. If this particular group of people knew who I really was, I wouldn't be an insider. I wouldn't be in here. And so it just kind of started to erode. At that point, we switched churches. We tried some different things. We ended up at a fantastic church that we're still connected to in some ways, but the deconstruction has continued and really challenging. During my master's project at seminary, I was doing a project on the opportunity for women to lead and be mentored in the church. And a lot of women high up in different denominations shared with me their experience, and I was devastated. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't outrun this. I can't outwork this. The bias that's here, the harm that's being done, doesn't align with who I thought we were as a church. And so that was, it was kind of started before that, but that was kind of the fire on the gasoline of just like, oh, I can't outwork this. I can't outrun this. I will never be good enough to overcome these bias. Oh shoot, what biases am I benefiting from? And like kind of then taking the 360 inventory and just being like, oh man, there's a lot of this I'm not getting right. So that's kind of how I got into the deconstruction space. Before that, I was in online ministry, blogging, that kind of thing. So I've been in the online space for a little over a decade, and it's been kind of I don't think it's been a complete change in mission. It's been more of a refining. Sorry if that word is triggering. I know sometimes it can be, but like it's been almost a tightening of what I believe and kind of sifting and sorting out what isn't resonant. And it's not a beautiful process. The results can be beautiful, but anybody who's got through this process is like, please don't say it's beautiful, because it's not.
Right. Painful for a lot of people. Maybe we can even start there. Like, what is deconstruction? Why is it painful? Why are so many people going through it right now? Like, let's flesh this out.
Yeah. So the thing about deconstruction is there's a lot. It's like saying church, right? Or it's like saying faith. There's a lot of different definitions. So if you go back to kind of the heart of the initial like philosophy, Derrida sort of thing, it's really a taking apart and examining. And in that context, it's taking ideas and breaking them down further and further and further. So almost a disassembling. And for some people who are in communities that are highly marginalized by the church, deconstruction means just getting out, getting safe, and then thinking about spirituality. For people like me who have a lot of privilege in the space, like I can still, being a white hetero cis woman who's married with children in the Midwest, I can still walk around the church. There's a lot of privilege that I have, so I've been able to keep one foot in and kind of one foot out and have that sifting and sorting process. So when I talk about deconstruction, it's really examining the entirety of faith and testing out like what's a big T truth and what's a cultural preference and what actually never should have happened, right? Like what's just made up, and then recentering on what's good and what's sacred and holy, even if it goes radically against what we were taught in the church. And I think that's why it's so difficult, because we're really taught that certainty in most places, we're taught that certainty is a path to holiness, right? And so questioning and doubting is okay in most churches, as long as it's leading us to those answers that other people have determined, right? So you can ask questions, you can doubt, but only within a certain context. And if you start asking questions and doubting outside of that, that's when it becomes a really, really difficult space. So learning how to ask questions and to doubt and to trust yourself and to be curious, even when you don't know where you're going to end up, is a huge part of deconstruction. And it's really traumatizing, because when one person starts doing things radically different, the whole system gets scared. And unfortunately, a lot of people lash out, especially if you're in a high control religion. Man, it gets ugly quick. And what it leaves us isolated and full of self-doubt and just like, what the heck? What am I doing? Right? And we see that in a lot of online spaces. Like people are just saying, oh, wait, you had that same experience? Oh, maybe it wasn't my fault. And that's really the power of having conversations like this one and other communities about, what does deconstruction look like for you? What does it look like for me? Where do our experiences overlap? And how can we learn from each other without saying, oh, you have the right answers. So I need to believe exactly what you believe, because that's just adopting a different belief system. That's not actually a deconstruction.
Wow. Well, I'm having this question come to me. So like, let's say we are people who are used to going to church, used to being in the religious circles, and yet they're finding that pull, like push and pull within their heart, that they're like, some of this stuff, I really resonate with this. And some of the stuff I just drives me nuts. Like, this can't possibly be true. What would you say to those people if they're feeling that like resistance, that pressure to kind of believe what everyone's always believed and just like go along with the herd, so to speak? What would you offer to them as something that they can do as their first steps?
Yeah. I think the first step is recognizing that you get to do this on your own pace. You get to set your own pace, and you don't have to tell anybody until you want to. And I think that that's really liberating, because we have this sort of, I'm hiding in a closet, having these doubts and these questions, and it brings on a lot of shame, right? There's a lot of self-judgment that we've been conditioned towards. So it's not our natural state as humans, but it's what the system has taught us of like, oh, when you're having doubts, or when you're not speaking your truth, or when you're not being as aggressive in apologetics or evangelism, that's a spiritual flaw, that's a weakness, and we need to fix that. But the truth is, your story is your story, and you get to determine how long it takes you to sort through things, and you also get to determine who has earned the right, who has proven themselves trustworthy enough to be inside this very vulnerable space of questioning, even if it's not about faith. If you're in a relationship and you're questioning if this is the right relationship, you don't run out and blast it all over social media the second you have that doubt, right? You give yourself permission to sit in it and simmer. I always say the magic is in the simmer. So it's not an Instapot. It's a real slow crock pot. It's like cast iron cooking over the fire. It will get hot. It will get done, but it's not going to happen in the next 20 minutes. So
Yes.
pace yourself, give yourself permission for it to be messy. And also give yourself permission to not know where you're going. Because a lot of times we try really hard to hang on to that part I love, or this part that is probably true, I just haven't got there yet. And we're trying to like be curious and also steer ourselves in a certain direction. And that creates a ton of internal conflict. So if you can learn to unclench your hands and just say, you know what, actually, I don't know. And that's okay. I'm good with that for now. It takes a lot of the pressure off, and it allows you to use that energy for other things rather than constantly pressuring yourself and shaming yourself because you haven't figured it out above the eyebrows. You haven't logicked your way to where you think you should be.
Oh, these are so important points. And I'm seeing so much overlap in like the studies that I've done with A Course in Miracles and my teachings and so forth, because it really does focus on the deconstruction of our thought system, like our reinterpretation of our beliefs, like the sifting and sorting out, like what is truly loving and helpful and what is not. But like you're saying, like it's so important for us to almost just have our hands open and be willing, like be okay in the not knowing, because that's when like the true faith, capital F, can like lead us to these new realizations, these new insights, these change of hearts. And then it just unfolds and we get taken to where we're meant to go. But I love this. So you're almost like reframing it like, wait a minute, like faith is a personal thing. You're on a personal journey. It's going to take you where you need to go for what's written on your soul, on your script. Pay attention to that. You will be led in that. So I love that. I feel even saying it the way you're saying it, there's so much safety in that. Like it feels, oh, wow, I can question. Oh my God, I can doubt. I can wrestle with these ideas. I cannot agree with everything that's talked about on the pulpit. Like, oh my God, I feel like there's so much potential for freedom in that way of looking at it.
Yeah. And that's, it's that potential is really threatening to oppressive systems.
Sure.
So if we kind of nerd it out for just a second, like the religious system that we have, there are absolutely some good things in there, but we have to remember what it's built upon.
Yeah.
And it's built upon racism. It's built on enslavement and genocide. It's built on oppression of women, and non-binary people rarely have any space at all. And that's what it was built on. And that's what the modern religious system is built on. Okay. And so when we're in that space, anything that doesn't preserve or uphold or even feed into those ideals is threatening to that system. And the reason the system has so much power is because it's a self-sustaining system, right? Like the less power you and I have as individuals, the more power the system has and the more the system is able to exploit us as individuals. So when we start taking a step back and we start rocking the boat, it's threatening to the system and it's threatening to individuals in the system, even though they don't know it, right? Even though people who are, sometimes people are really malicious, but I think that the majority of the time when we're getting criticism and there's this backlash, it's by people who really feel like that we're the ones falling off the wagon. We're the ones who are at risk. And most of the time they want the best for us. But what they don't realize is that their reaction is not rooted in love. Their reaction is rooted in the fear, the scarcity, the hellfire, eternal condemnation, all those things that actually weren't part of the original Christianity, which would have been Jesus' time and the early church right after it. Now, of course, there was all kinds of gender bias. There was all kinds of racism and xenophobia and all of those things in that era. But to say that it's okay that we as a church protect those things just because they were in the Bible really, really is contradictory. So that's why it gets a little messy. And, there's a lot of backlash that happens and a lot of people get hurt. We're also seeing deconstruction being used as sort of an evangelism tool, which is slimy and gross, to put it nicely, where like, yes, here's this particular celebrity or here's this author and this person has deconstructed and they went out and they faced their doubts and they came right back here and you can do the same. Here's a book that will lead you through it, or here's a course that will lead you through it, or here's a sermon series that will lead you through it. But the thing is, you can change a belief, you can change a couple of beliefs, but that's not actually the same as deconstructing your belief system all the way down to the roots. It just isn't. It just isn't. There's this idea that going out and then coming back to the fold is deconstruction. And honestly, if you deconstruct and you're like, actually, that's what I believe, I want to go back, cool, that's your deconstruction. But to say that every person who deconstructs should end up right here, that's not deconstruction. That's just putting a new sign out front of the same old religious system that's been hurting people for centuries.
Getting goosebumps. Seriously, though.
I'm not good at short answers. This is such a meaty topic.
It is so meaty. I love it.
We can take our time. Around the barn quite a few times.
Well, this is so great. And like, I keep seeing like images. I might be off base here and you can correct me if I am, but I feel like I keep seeing images of like Jesus, like when he was here. And in a sense, like he was like the leader of the deconstruction of faith. Like, I feel like when he would speak of the new kingdom, like it's threatening to the establishment, even though the kingdom is freedom for everyone, including the establishment. Right. And so like, I feel like him just being the voice for love that he was naturally threatening to the system the way that it was. And I feel like now in contemporary day society, when we're like, wow, I'm an individual being created by God. I love Jesus. Like, let's do this. When we start to almost step into that freedom, into that self-expression and become more Christ-like, so to speak, it can become really, terrifying for the people who are part of it and the people at the top of it. So am I right in like drawing that correlation?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I think the thing that we forget a lot in the modern church is that, yes, there is connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament. There's connection between creation and God and all that. But Jesus didn't actually come into his faith community and just change it a little bit. Like, it was a radical shift. And whether you believe that to be, historical or allegorical, like it stands up either way, right? And I think that there's this huge misconception, especially here in the US. I'm in the Midwest. Like, you don't have to be in church to get this stuff. You get it just walking down the street, right? There's this huge misconception that the way the church has been for the last 100 years is the way it has always been. And that's not true. That, like, the church has shifted dramatically over the last 2,000 years. And to say, no, we have it right is so egotistical. And I would even say idolatrous and heretical, because if you believe in a God who is so big, a creator that is so big that we can never fully understand, then how can you fortify your faith and defend it and say, this is the one right way? Like, those things don't match up. Like, it's kind of the hypocrisy of saying we were created by a divine being who loves us absolutely, wants to nurture us, wants us to succeed, wants to see us have fulfilling lives, and yet also created us capable of making mistakes with a black and sinful heart that's going to send us to an eternal hell.
Yeah.
Unless we do better. Like,
Right.
you love us, you don't love us. Right?
Yeah.
Like,
So which one is it?
right. Like, anybody who's been in an actual open relationship with someone that's healthy and not based in codependency, like, you can't say that you love someone unconditionally and then booby trap their entire life.
Right.
Somewhere those things don't match up. So
yes.
it's, it's a big messy thing, but I do think that, I mean, there's a lot of people in deconstruction who don't subscribe to a lot of the evangelical beliefs or doctrines. They come out of fundamentalist cults. They come out of these really horrific environments. And yet they're like, there's something about Jesus. Like, I don't even know what it is, but there's something about Jesus. And there's something about God, even though I can't hardly say the word God because I've been so traumatized. Right. So even introducing this new language and talking about creator and talking about divinity and divine and, calling God she, like, you really want to upset some people, call God they, even though it's appropriate. It is the correct pronoun for Jesus, God, and the Holy Spirit.
That's true.
When you say they, people freak out a little bit.
Right.
Because you're challenging the patriarchal, heteronormative bullshit hierarchy that even involves capitalism and colonialism, all these things.
All of it.
And none of those were ever promoted by Jesus. Never.
Hallelujah, sister. So with that, how does someone who's going through deconstruction realizes the ickiness about some of the aspects of church and religion, how do they preserve their faith through this? How does Jesus stand? How does faith stand when you walk through this?
Ready for this?
Yes.
You can't guarantee that's going to happen. Right? Like, say, for example, I work with some coaching clients, and if I have a client who comes to me and says, I really want to deconstruct, and also you got to show me how to do this without losing my faith, I'll be like, I can't. First of all, I can't tell you what to believe. That's not okay. I mean, I can, but I shouldn't. Right? That's not a spiritual mentor or a coach. That's someone who's evangelizing you, even if it's in a subtle, around the barn sort of way. The second piece of that is, if you are looking for certainty, if you are saying, this is where I want to land, then you're holding tightly to something without actually questioning it. It's kind of like being in a relationship, and you're like, yeah, I don't think this relationship is great, but I don't want to give up on the relationship. I don't want to walk away. How do you get really honest with yourself about whether or not that is a good, healthy relationship if your number one goal is preserving the relationship?
Right.
Same thing within the church. If your number one goal is to preserve the church as it is, or to preserve your church or your denomination or your particular doctrines, then every time you start to question, your bias is prioritizing the church, prioritizing that belief system, rather than prioritizing your own intuition and your own knowledge and this beautiful brain that we have that can sort out unbelievable things. That's not getting prioritized. It's almost like when you go in and you're Googling, like, you're right on something, and you're Googling and you're trying to find an article that backs you up. And it doesn't matter if there's a million articles that don't back you up. You're looking for the one that allows you to keep that belief. So, you can absolutely say, I really want to keep my faith. You just have to do it with open hands and be like, I really want to keep my faith, but I don't know if that's possible, right? That's a really honest statement. Saying, I want to keep my faith and I'm going to do whatever I can to maintain it. That may be backing yourself into a corner that you just can't get out of without tremendous compromise. And I don't mean compromise in a healthy way. I mean, like, deprioritizing your mental health or your relational health or even your physical and spiritual health.
Oh, yes, I can see how that could be really tough for some people to hear, especially because we want to cling so tightly to the aspects of what we think we want. But I think what you're saying is really refreshing, though, because it's saying, like, if you want to go through this deconstruction, you want to know what is true, you want to know, let's just say, what is loving, then we have to be willing to let go of absolutely everything.
Yeah.
And that's when it will be revealed to us. And I feel like in the Course in Miracles, it talks about when that's almost like a forgiveness process, right? But the forgiveness will undo and correct what is unloving, and then only that which is loving will remain. But I think when we're in that space of undoing or forgiving or deconstructing, that we don't know what is loving and what is not. So
exactly.
we can't make that decision on our own. It's like, I'm almost feeling through what you're saying, the energy of like, the future's in the hands of God. Like, just leave it. And whatever's meant to stay will stay, whatever's meant to go will go, and it will be in your highest interest because you're asking for that. But don't cling to anything. Don't cling to anything. And like, isn't that what Jesus said too? Like, didn't he say like, give everything you have away and like, come follow me? Like, doesn't he say like, when you let go of everything here, you will receive the kingdom of God? Like, I feel like you're saying the same thing, just in different, more contemporary language.
Yeah, there's a really interesting balance to strike here because, toxic theology, toxic religion, toxic culture, those things can happen in every space.
Sure.
And so a lot of times, I think, especially with the rise of kind of Christian nationalism that we're seeing, I think a lot of times we say, oh, that toxic religion, that's a fundamentalist thing. That's a politically conservative thing. And we miss that there's this whole spectrum of beliefs and there's toxicity in every space because that's the system that everything was built on, right? And so we have to be really careful when we're releasing things to not release things in a way that is dismissive or spiritual bypassing.
Yes.
Right? So for I have a couple clients who are in AA, and this is a huge struggle because part of recovery, whether it's Christian or more of a non-denominational sort of thing, an interfaith thing, there's a point where you give it up to God, you give it up to your higher power. But what do you do when that higher power has been credited for the abuse that you've received? Right? So before you can give things up to your higher power, you have to realize that if there is no higher power, you're going to be okay. And that's really scary for some people who've been taught to die to self and that your heart's not trustworthy and all those other things that are used to keep us small. But the thing is, we've got to get to a place where we're willing to open our hands without knowing what's going to happen and learn to kind of fold into ourselves and just say, I can do this. Even if it's ugly, even if it's hard, even if it's the loneliest thing in the world, and I never find all the right answers, if I believe in a generous, compassionate, divine creature that made me, there's got to be some good in here somewhere, and maybe that's enough for now.
Yes, I feel like you're talking about the little willingness.
Yeah, the open-handedness gets a little messy because I think we're taught that if we just like, it's almost dismissive. It's almost like a stonewalling type practice of like, oh, just give it to God, just pray about it, just like, okay, maybe, but the just is the problem, right? Like if we're trusting someone, a system, our creator, whatever the case may be, if we're trusting someone else more than we trust ourselves, it's going to be really hard to have any, I hate using good and bad as the dichotomy, but like to have any solid and healthy, non-codependent, intimate relationships with humans or with deities, that's going to be really hard because we don't trust ourselves enough to lower our walls when we're around ourselves. How are we going to do it when we're around other people? How are we going to do it in the back of our closet in the dark night of the soul, right? How are we going to do that if we don't trust ourselves enough to be with ourselves?
Yes. Well, maybe that leads me into another question then. Like, how do you start trusting yourself again? Like, how does one start rebuilding that trust in oneself so they can ultimately trust other things? Like, where does that come from?
Yeah. So if this makes your people mad, it's okay. It's okay to be totally frustrated by this. My clients always get annoyed with me with this, but the only way to learn to trust yourself more is to trust yourself more.
I knew you were going to say that.
Right? Like, okay. But it's the truth because you probably can't, it's really hard to trust ourselves because we've been conditioned not to. Okay. And there's kind of a loop that happens that's self-sustaining. So when we don't trust ourselves, we're worried that things will happen And then we're met with a circumstance. And because we don't trust ourselves, those things happen. But then that just reinforces the belief that we shouldn't trust ourselves, right? So that's the loop we get caught in. And the only way to get out of that loop is to do things differently. So even if it's something small, even if it's just saying, I don't know what's going to happen, but I actually am not going to go to church this week. And I'm going to trust that my body is like really stressed out every time I go to church. So I'm just going to take a deep breath. I'm not going to go, and I'm going to see what happens, even if it's terrifying. And I feel like maybe it's a bad decision, but my gut's like, hey, this is what we need to do. Just taking that baby step and trusting and knowing that there are, it's a very, very small list of things that cannot be reversed, right? I had a speaker, Reverend Christian Smith was at the Deconstructing Faith Summit last year. And one of the things that he said that was fantastic was the stakes are way up here all the time, which is why our nervous systems are so activated. But if you could just lower the stakes 1%, 3%, 5%, like if you could just take it down a notch, right? It will allow you to make decisions a little bit easier because we don't have this inflated importance that we attach to everything. So even like an example, I have kids and they're always in sports and always running around. Yeah, okay. So if I'm late picking up my kids, I used to be like, bad mom, like something awful is going to happen, like all these things. And now it's like, if I'm late picking up my kids, I'm going to be late picking up my kids. The world is not going to stop, right? They might get frustrated and mad at me, but that's okay because that's their right. Or I might have to just communicate like, hey, I'm really sorry, but this is what's happening. Right. And then by lowering those stakes, it becomes an action that we're taking, not like a measure of our personal worth. Right. Like I'm not less valuable as a human because I forgot to pick my kid up last week and they had to call me and remind me.
Right.
Exactly. That's not a value thing because I've knocked it down a couple of notches. So lowering the stakes and just starting to trust yourself, even when it feels kind of awful. Like you have to trust yourself when you feel untrustworthy.
Yes. Yeah, it totally makes sense. Yeah. I feel like it's the same thing with like what the Course in Miracles teaches. It's always saying like, it talks to us as if we are capable of everything when we think we're capable of nothing. Right. And so it's really just like start with the one step, like, okay, what would you have me do today? How can I offer love to someone else? Like, who can I talk to today? And it's like those little moments where you trust that inner nudge, that inner prompt, and build that trust and build that faith. And I would say the same thing as you. It's an action thing. Like you just got to do it, even though you're scared to do it, just do it anyway.
Yeah. And the other piece too, is I think that, oh gosh, we could go down a whole rabbit trail about attachment. We won't, but if people want to go down a rabbit trail, go look up attachment, look up secure attachment, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment. Basically what it means is that when you were young and you were growing up, if you had stable, emotionally available caregivers who provided safety, they were a base that allowed you to go out and explore courageously, vulnerably, and come back and know everything would be okay. The majority of us just don't have that. Like, even amazing parents don't always know how to do that. So we end up with these really weird attachments where we're avoiding or we're anxious or we're flipping back and forth between the two. And this is especially true for people who've grown up in trauma or even like with parents who are traumatized. So the trauma doesn't have to be yours. It could be your caregiver's trauma that makes it hard for them to provide safety for you. Even though they may be providing more safety than what they had, it may not actually be full safety. So the whole thing about deconstruction and the whole thing about learning to trust yourself more is that you've got to get away. You've got to be able to take a step back from attaching to people who cannot be fully available or who cannot provide you safety and start attaching to yourself and providing that safety. So in my coaching, we talk a lot about mothering in an archetypal way, not in a I had a baby way, right? But this nurturing, very, very feminine. It's available to everybody. You don't have to just be a biological woman or like this feminine energy of mothering is caring for and nurturing the parts of you that didn't get nurtured. And when you can let your walls down enough to start feeling safe in your own body and recognize that even if nobody else has, you've got your own back. If nobody else is there for you, you are actually going to be able to provide some level of safety and nourishment and comfort to yourself. It gets a lot easier to trust yourself. But how do you trust yourself if nobody else has ever been trustworthy, right? Like that's where you just kind of have to start. You have to start with compassion and kindness, and just trust that you're watering your garden, and it may take years to appear, but there will be fruit, and it will change things for you. And if it takes years, okay, it takes years. It's your story, it's your timeline. There's space for whatever type of healing you need.
Yes. I love that. I love that. And I love that you're just saying, just start with trusting yourself more. And I can kind of like feel like the hearts of people watching, just like committing to, okay, I want to commit to trusting myself more. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that looks like. I don't know how, but I want to. Like, let me start here today.
Yeah, maybe it's something as simple as it's spring when we're recording this. It's gorgeous outside. I'm gonna go walk to the mailbox, or I'm gonna go out and see how my garden is doing, and something in me just wants to take my shoes off.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do it. Yeah.
Walk through the grass, right? I'm on this hike and I see this pretty rock and I want to take it home. Okay. You don't have to know what type of rock it is or what the magical properties of it are, or like why it's significant. Like, it's pretty. I like it. Right? Like just get used to trusting that there are things that your body and your brain and your heart and your voice and your womb space, like all these parts of you, there are things that those parts of you know that you have never had permission to value or sometimes even hear. And so just being like, oh, what, this is my favorite co-working space I go to. This is my seat always. I wonder what it'd be like to go over there. Right? Or I do a lot with diffusers because what would I just grab random oils? I have no idea what the symbolism is. And I've had to like not go look up what those are good for and just be like, okay, this is what my body wants today. Or this label is pretty. I'm drawn to it. I'm going to throw that in the diffuser. I don't know why, but the why isn't as important as the listening and as the being with and learning to trust. And that's really, people are going to be like, why does it matter if I buy the peanut butter M&Ms instead of the chocolate M&Ms? Well, if there's something inside you that's like peanut butter M&Ms, do it. Like, trust that's your body's like, hey, that's what we want, and just begin to listen to those systems and begin to question when you start shutting things down. Just question like, where did I learn that? And is that one of my favorite things to ask is I talk a lot about flourishing, right? Is that moving me towards flourishing, or is that pushing me or keeping me tethered to that system I'm trying to get out of?
That's good. That's a good question.
There's no judgment. Is it good or bad, right or wrong? Is God going to strike me down? Like, it's just, is this moving me towards flourishing? Is this moving me towards ease and abundance? Or is this keeping me tethered to that black sinful heart that is never going to be good enough?
Right.
Oh, no wonder you can't trust yourself. You've been taught not to.
Exactly. No shame. This is so beautiful. This is such a rich conversation. I feel like the last thing that I want to say here is, is there any, you've given us so much already, which I appreciate, but is there any final words of wisdom or thought that you would like to leave with our viewers today before we depart?
Yeah, I think that, deconstruction and questioning and transitions in life can be really isolating. And so you got to find some people to do this with, and they have to be trustworthy, and they have to deserve to be in your space. And so for a lot of people, that's not going to be in your community. There are these rare unicorn pastors and church staff who will like walk it with you without pressuring you. But for most of us, that's not a thing. And so, therapy is huge. Getting a deconstruction coach is huge. Being in a small group community and starting to like get these same supports in place that you used to have in the church is really important. The key is they can't be affiliated with church. So if the deconstruction coach is like, I'm going to show you how to do this, and when we get to the end, you'll have you'll have these beliefs or whatever. That's not exactly a coach, right? And if you're going to a counselor who is in a Christian counseling setting, there may be some ethical issues where when you start questioning their faith, that particular counselor will bring in their belief system. And that's not what you need. So get into a space where you can say anything that comes up, whether it's right or wrong, and you've got some support. But it's the support that is actually partnering with you rather than a hierarchical support that's saying, I know what you should believe. And you're like, tell me what I should believe. Even though that's going to feel really familiar and may feel safer, in the long run, it's not. It's really not safe. So vet your sources well, but get some sources of support. And don't be afraid to be like, okay, this was great for 6 months and now I'm done.
Right.
Or to be like, okay, that particular blogger, I obsessed over all their content. It was so resonant. And now I feel like maybe I'm transitioning to a different space and they really agitate my nervous system and I need to find some peace. Or, I learned so much from them, but because they're in this space over and over and they're staying in their niche, like I need to go find a different resource that's going to help me do something different. Like, don't be afraid to move and to leave and join communities and to work with practitioners and step away. Like that's again, starting to trust yourself and not just trying to do things the right way. And I think that's the most liberating thing. If you get the support that you need and you know that you have permission at any time to say, nope, I'm out, that's really powerful. And that's really going against what oppressive systems teach you your life is supposed to be like.
Oh, I love this. It's bringing us back to intuition and trusting ourselves and really being able to live our happiest, most abundant lives by really being guided by the inner guidance system within instead of any oppressive societies outside of ourselves. So this is really important topic. And thank you for the work that you do and for taking the time to share with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I always love these kind of conversations. I always walk away with more ideas and just like sometimes when you say things out loud, you're like, oh, I need to go back and listen to that.
Yes.
Really interesting. So
yeah.
Thank you for inviting me on here. These are always, just life-giving conversations.
Yes, agreed. Well, thank you so much, Angela. And I'll be sure to have all your information down below too. So if people are inspired to connect with you, they can. Awesome.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for joining us today. See you soon.